Sweet. All right. Who here remembers when the United States almost went to nuclear war with the Soviet Union? No, not 1962, 1983. Yes, the President of the United States had assembled his advisors in the Situation Room with the objective of deterring the Soviet Union from launching a nuclear weapon. And they argued for a week, but at the end of the week, they were angry, they were tired, and they were bitter and defeated, and they failed at their objective. So they decided the best course of action then was to launch a preemptive strike. There's the president, finger resolute on the button, but he first turns to his aide and asks, "What happens when I press this button?" And without missing a beat, his aide replied, "Well, Mr. President, you're going to launch a weapon that kills 10 million people." And the president refused to hit the button. You not want to know why you don't remember that? It's because it was a game. Yes, a game played with real Department of Defense officials, but after being locked together in a conference room, drinking bad coffee for a week, everything they felt was as emotionally, psychologically, and physiologically real as if it was actually happening. For the official who played the president, he really did think he was about to kill 10 million people. Games can be fun, but they can also be life and death. Games let you work together to overcome obstacles that feel real, but are risk-free. And perhaps, maybe the first time you practice responding to a crisis should not be during an actual crisis. So, I have designed military, education, and entertainment games since 1997. For most of my 25 years in the Army and the Air Force, I designed games all the way from small team exercises all the way up to base-wide events with thousands of participants, aircraft taking off, people defending positions with blank weapons, and casualties on the field with moulage injuries. And now that I'm clearly a civilian, I'm a political science at Colorado State University. Yes, go Rams. Where I research player behavior inside of game worlds. I run experiments with games, and I teach students with games to engage them with course concepts. For fun, I help design heroic settings for Mobius Worlds Publishing, a role-playing game design firm. I also help companies with games, and I mentor inmates with games. I am a professional gaming nerd. Yes. Why games? What makes games so powerful? It's because of the unique confines of the game space that I and other games researchers call the magic circle. It was Dutch cultural historian who coined the term magic circle, saying that the temple and the tennis court were indistinguishable. What he meant by that was that games are spaces inside which ritual becomes real to the participants. Or put differently, that's right, my gaming nerd. Put differently, games are miniature rites of passage where you take risks and learn from the consequences of your actions before you actually kill 10 million people. Now, perhaps the most crazy example I have, as in crazy intense, when I was in Afghanistan in 2014 during a year of a highly contested Afghan presidential election. I remember the colonel busting in my office and saying, "Pigeon, yes, you're a political scientist. I need to know everything there is about the upcoming election. I don't really care who wins. What I do care about is, will people die in Kabul because of this, and what do we do to stop it?" Roger that, sir. So we started with the real-world voting behavior data from Afghanistan. From this, we are pretty sure that unlike the United States, where people vote on left and right policy positions, in Afghanistan, they largely voted on cultural lines. For example, I'm Pashtun, therefore I'm voting for the Pashtun candidate. Well, I'm Tajik, and I'm voting for the Tajik candidate. I assure you the cultural nuances in Afghanistan are far more complex than I can bottle in a talk. But in the case of this election, it really was as simple as having one Tajik candidate and 9 Pashtun candidates. We forecast that the Tajik candidate would win the first round but not get 50%, while the 9 Pashtun candidates were fighting amongst themselves. In the second round, the Tajik candidate would lose because the Pashtun candidate would have the full weight of the majority cultural group behind him. Knowing this, what does this mean about violence in Kabul, especially with limited resources? Game on. Now, Kabul is big, as in really big, 100 square miles bigger than New York City. So we built a literal board game out of a map of Kabul. Think playing Risk or Twilight Imperium, but with real lives at stake. Next, the characters. Who might get hurt, who might attack? We had cultural groups. We had NATO forces. We had Afghan security and the Taliban. So we then embodied ourselves inside the minds of the characters, even asking help from the Afghan forces we worked with to help us understand. I mean, what would they do? Where would they go? Violence could break out even if everyone was happy and secure. And just where might the Taliban show up? So we ran this game over multiple iterations and kept coming to the same security conclusions. So we went back into the colonel's office and said, "Sir, this is what we recommend doing to ensure people don't die in Kabul." And the colonel looked at us and said, "Then that's what we will do." And you know what? We were right. The Tajik candidate won the first round. The Pashtun candidate won the second round. But thanks to our security, not a single NATO troop, not a single Afghan security member, and not a single Afghan civilian was injured or killed in electoral violence. That was the proudest moment of my entire military career. You know why? Because with a game, I saved lives. That is the power of the magic circle. So these first 2 examples have been government. What about corporations or nonprofits? About a year ago, I received a phone call from a Jewish nonprofit called the Z3 Project in California saying, "Pigeon, we've already decided to do a game for our annual conference, but we only have 1 day. Can you please help us scope it and shape it?" Absolutely. Now, the mission of the Z3 Project is to improve relationships between global Jewish diaspora and Israel. And the particular theme of this conference was to examine the needs of a diverse Jewish communal landscape. There's our objective right there. Now we need the characters. Who has the needs? Rabbis, philanthropists, students, the Israeli government. From this, we crafted a list of 10 different teams. Now to challenge them with a scenario, just like Afghanistan, ripped straight from the headlines. Looking ahead to the 2024 US presidential election, which further solidified the relationship between the US government and the Israeli government. But there is growing anger in the Jewish diaspora community at Israeli government policies, to which Israel responded, "Well, maybe we'll get rid of the law of return, where Jews can move freely back to Israel." And this all with an undercurrent of growing anti-Semitism in the US, which was really happening then and is still happening now. Game on. Z3 director Zach Bodner gets on the stage with an engaged audience, introduces a scenario, introduces the speakers. Speakers are the team leads. They make opening remarks, and then they go to their breakout rooms to argue the scenario up, and argue they did. And what's great is they came back with the same conclusions: increased youth involvement, increased education, and increased use of risk-free spaces where they can have the difficult conversations risk-free while learning to listen and learning to show empathy. That sounds like a magic circle. Even more provocative was when they come back and say, why aren't we using spaces like this to have the really difficult conversations like Palestine? from a game, there's appetite for that. And we came up with a list of action items, and the teams looked at them and said, we can do these from a game to reality. And wouldn't you know, just a few weeks ago, a friend I met at the conference, Dr. Scott Lazensky, called me up and said, hey, Pigeon, 2 colleagues and I just had an article published in the Jerusalem Post where we cited the Z3 project as an example of using a game and saying, why aren't we having games to have long-term, ongoing, complex discussions with Jewish diaspora leaders and the state of Israel? Again, the power of the magic circle. And you can do it too. It could be totally ridiculous. Sea monsters, aliens, or my personal favorite, the zombie apocalypse. Really, those doors bust open and brain-chomping zombies come through? What does the stage crew do? What do the ushers do? What do you do? It's fantasy, but you're going to learn a lot about yourself and your team. So when the next crisis comes, it could be a major winter storm. It could be a data breach. Or dare I say, it can be another pandemic. But having played together before, you have gained that personal team and team confidence knowing how to react. Games are awesome. Yes. Games and the magic circle are wonder-filled places where heroes are born, friendships are forged, and mountains are climbed. With games, you build trust. With games, you build diverse teams. With games, you learn how to fail before you learn how to win. With games, you unleash courage and creativity that you would have thought possible. So go out there and conquer those dragons and harness the magic circle. But just remember, it is only a game until it isn't. Thank you, I love you, and game on.